Hello everyone and welcome to another video on the ToLiss Airbus A321, and today we're going to look at glide slope capture from above. So this is when you're on an approach to fly an ILS and you find that you are above the glide slope. How do we capture it? It's quite a simple, small procedure, but it's really important to get right. It can go wrong quite quickly if you don't. I am a real-world Airbus pilot, so I will be trying to bring some extra context to your home simulations, showing you what we do with the real airplane. But as always, this isn't based on any real-world airline procedures as such, and it's just for our home use in X-Plane and isn't for any real-world use. So let's get started. So today we're going to be back in Amsterdam flying the ILS to runway 18 right, which I have coded in here. If you need help with how to set up the FMGC, I have a video on that, which I'll provide a link to. But here we are, it's all tuned in and set up to go for a flat full landing, otherwise pretty standard ILS. That's why I've chosen it, aside from perhaps a slightly low platform altitude of 2,000 feet. So what we'll do is we'll get ourselves out onto the localizer, and then we'll let the glide slope go beneath us, and then I'll show you how we would get ourselves down onto the glide slope. So why might you end up above the profile? Well, you may have had it in your home simulations, and certainly it happens in real life. Not that regularly. It could be your own fault. It could be that you didn't get yourself down fast enough earlier on in the approach. So if air traffic control weren't forcing you to descend early and you were trying to do a nice continuous descent and then you get it slightly wrong later on in the approach, maybe a tailwind or something caught you out and you find yourself slightly high by the time you're on the ILS. It could be that air traffic control just couldn't let you descend with a glide slope. Maybe there was a helicopter underneath, something like that. That occasionally happens, and it's not until after the glide slope's beneath you that they can clear you for the approach. In some places, it's quite forced from the terrain. So, for example, in Glasgow, it's not uncommon to get vectored by air traffic control, and then it'd be a very, very short time period where they clear you for the glide slope. So if someone else talks on the radio, something like that, it means that you can't get that clearance and you have to be ready to descend from above. So in order to set this up, I'm going to descend to 4,000 feet. And as we said, the platform altitude in Amsterdam is 2,000 feet, but we're going to pretend we're further out and being kept high by air traffic control. So we'll descend to 4,000 feet. We've got the approach phase activated. So we're in managed speed. And now I'm going to vector myself. So let's get ourselves heading further out. 4,000 feet, if we times 4 by 3 for our 3-degree approach, then that's going to be a 12-mile final. So I need to get myself somewhere about 12 miles away from the threshold would be my normal intercept point, and we're going to go through that before we descend. Let's draw out a center line from center fix 18 right. That's on course of 182, I believe. 183. There we go, and we'll pull heading. Excellent. So, how are we going to manage this? Well, the first thing you need to do when you realize you're high is you need to start thinking about losing energy from the aeroplane. So how are you going to do that? Well, you need to slow down and you need to start putting flap out and drag out. Out here, we're still clean, so I could start using flap 1 and the speed brakes, that sort of thing. But by the time we're on the localizer, it's going to probably mean you want to get yourself gear down flap 2 as a minimum. You could even go to flap 3. It all depends. If you try and descend on the glide slope or descend above the glide slope to capture it without configuring, the speed will accelerate, and then you'll find that because your speed's accelerated, you now can't configure because you're above the limit speeds, and then you're stuck and you have to go around anyway. So it's about slowing down, getting some energy out of the airplane, as you would do up in the cruise. If you went through the top of your descent point in the cruise and you realized that you were going to be high, you would need to slow down because it gives you more room. Once we've done that, it's very important to do 3 things, basically. What we're going to do is, once the glide slope's beneath us and we're cleared to descend with it, I'm going to first of all arm approach, because it's really important you have that armed. Otherwise, you'll have nothing to capture and the airplane will descend through the glide slope all the way to the ground. So arm the approach. Then we're going to wind this altitude out of the way, because if it's beneath us, the airplane will just capture it. So if we end up, say I wound that down to 2,000 feet, and we just descended towards 2,000 feet, and we hadn't captured the glide slope yet, then the airplane will just capture 2,000 and level off, and you've defeated the purpose. And finally, we're going to pull the vertical speed we want. So I'm going to start off with 1,500, and it's maximum of around 2,000 feet per minute, but that would be only if you were far out. If you're too close in, 2,000 would be quite risky. You could get a GPWS warning. Also, if you haven't configured enough, so if you haven't got enough gear or flap out, and you try and set 2,000 feet per minute, the airplane will accelerate. And I would say even gear down flap 2 at 2,000 feet per minute, the airplane may accelerate, and you'd need to use speed brakes. So you could be very careful with this technique. And that's it, really. We have to do it in that order. We have to have armed the approach first, as I said. We need to wind this out of the way, otherwise it will capture. And then after we've done that, we must pull vertical speed. There is a risk that we might accidentally, whilst winding this out of the way in the real airplane, some pilots, out of reflex, have ended up pulling it at the same time. And then the airplane will just climb to whichever altitude you've wound it to. If you accidentally pull it and then you immediately pull a vertical speed, then it will just revert to the vertical speed. So that captures the threat of us accidentally pulling the altitude knob by immediately pulling the vertical speed. So we always do that. Even if we think the airplane's in vertical speed already, you need to pull it to make sure it overrides whatever else. Okay, so let's have a look. So here we are now establishing on the localizer, and I'll bring up the PFD so we can see it clearly. This was quite a bad intercept heading, so we're going to go through slightly. Really important that you don't do this procedure until you are on the localizer. You cannot do this procedure if you are not on it yet. So you've got to be in lock mode and actually on it. So it'd be dangerous for me to start descending off the profile or off the cleared altitude until I'm actually on the localizer. Because when they clear us for the ILS, we're not cleared until we're actually on the center line. So they may clear you for the whole thing, but if you start descending before you get with the Glideslope before you're on localizer, that's very dangerous. The procedure doesn't cover you for the safety of that. So now I can see we're getting high. Oh dear, the Glideslope's going past us and we aren't on the localizer. Air traffic haven't cleared us. So I'm going to put out flap 2, start slowing down so I'm ready. And I'm in managed speed, so that's great. So the airplane will start decelerating. Okay, now I'm coming back in on the localizer. Let's put that on the gear because I'm going to need the gear down as well to do this. Okay, speed's really coming back now, that's good. And we're getting within range on the localizer, that looks safe. And then if air traffic control was to say just, okay, now you're clear to descend with the Glideslope, I'm going to do my 3 things. So first of all, arm the approach. I need to make sure I've got Glideslope armed beneath me. Wind up the altitude, get it out of the way, and now wind down the vertical speed and pull. And I'm going to start off with 1500. There we go, speed, vertical speed 1500. We're on the localizer and we have Glideslope armed in blue. And now you can see on the PFD, we are descending 1500 feet per minute. The speed is staying stable because we've got gear and flap out, so we've got plenty of drag. And at 1500 feet per minute, we're sort of capturing the Glideslope, but it's not going as quickly as I'd like. So I can actually add a little bit more because the speed's under control. We're still 3,000 feet above the ground, so I think it's reasonable to go to 1700 feet per minute. As I said, 2,000 would be a maximum. And here we go, very simple. And now here comes the Glideslope, Glideslope star. If you have the speed brakes in use, you need to be ready to get rid of those because now the airplane is going to pull up and it will lose energy as it regains the Glideslope. And that's it, very simple. It doesn't work if you're too close in, obviously. It doesn't work if you aren't configured or you were too fast in the first place. And it needs all 3 steps to work. And I'll show you what could happen if you don't get those right now. Okay, so this time we're going to have a look at the same thing, but I'm going to forget to arm the approach. So I realise that we're going through, so let's go flap 2, gear down. See the Glideslope is going beneath me, coming back in on localizer. So now our traffic clears us to descend, so I'm going to forget to arm the approach. I'm going to wind that altitude out of the way. I see the localizers coming in and safe, so I'm going to start my descent. And let's go straight to 1700. So we're in speed, vertical speed 1700 and on the localizer. And at first, it seems things are going okay. Get the gear out, flap out, speed is stable. Although you can see it's not quite as stable as it was earlier. If you don't do it quick enough and you start down the Glideslope at 180 knots, it can be tricky to get that speed under control. Something to remember is the faster you're going, the faster you'll have to descend to maintain the profile. So the faster you start the Glideslope, the less chance you've got of catching it. And here we go. If I was sitting here watching this as a pilot, I'd go, okay, looking good, back on the Glideslope. But what I've missed is the fact that the Glideslope is not armed, so the airplane won't capture. And now we get ourselves into a really dangerous situation. So if I was to get distracted now and start looking at something else or thinking about the go around or the ground charts or the cabin or something like that, and what I've totally missed is that we've gone way below the Glideslope. And it would just keep doing this all the way down to the ground because remember we wound that altitude above us. So it's really important we have that capture mode in. Otherwise we end up in this situation where the airplane will descend in vertical speed and it will do this all the way until we get a GPWS. There is no mode to capture us beneath. It's really important to get this right. Okay, so let's have another look at this glide slope from above and what could go wrong. So this time, what I'm going to do is I am going to not move the altitude window above. So let's say, and this is a more likely scenario, to be honest. This is what air traffic will often do, where they may clear you to descend, but you're still above the glide slope. So I'll set an example of that. So it's not likely that they would have you sitting at 4,000 feet and then just clear you for the glide slope and expect you to descend. They would probably give you descent clearance and then say to continue or clear for the glide slope. So I'll set that up now. So here we go, coming in as before, and what we'll do is we'll recognize that we might get high. So about now I'd start to think, okay, 200 knots, I don't want to be coming down the glide slope that fast really. Let's go to flap 2. Certainly in a 321 at this weight I would be flap 2 for the glide slope. And we could pretend even that air traffic have told us they want us to keep 180 knots for now, which is quite common at 13 miles out. So we can do flap 2 180. We've still got the drag of the flap out, even if we've got the speed up slightly high. And now we might realise, okay, the glide slope's going beneath me, so I'm starting to get a bit concerned about that. So I'd ask air traffic for a speed reduction. If it's not available, then you'd start thinking about putting out the gear. But I wouldn't want to put the gear out until I know that I'm not going to need the engines to spool up, because if I put the gear out now, we'll just have more thrust on, and then as we descend, that will be a problem. Okay, so glide slope's gone beneath us. Now let's say air traffic descend to 2,000 feet further with the ILS. So let's say we put in 2,000 feet. And I arm my approach, so there's my approach armed. I've forgotten to do that, but now I just wind my vertical speed. And I go for 1,000. Okay, well that's not working, is it? 1,000 feet per minute at this speed will only mean we just follow the glide slope, so we need to be doing more if we want to capture it. So let's say I put on 1,400 feet per minute, and I put out the gear. So gear's gone down. And down we go. And let's say I think, okay, that's working, and I get it wrong, and I set the wrong vertical speed. So I've gone for 1,200 feet per minute here. And what we'll see, let's pretend that air traffic actually cleared us down to 3,000 feet. If I haven't wound the altitude above me, and I haven't made the glide slope, like we've got here, I could wind in more. Okay, I'm going to put in, let's do the 1,800, see if that works. Except it all gets ruined as soon as we reach the altitude and the airplane just levels off. So that's why we wind it out the way, because it's just going to block our descent eventually. But we can only wind it out the way, as we saw earlier, if we've got glide slope armed already. Okay, let's have a look at one more. And finally, this time we're going to look at what happens if I wind the altitude up. So I arm the approach correctly, I wind the altitude up, and then I accidentally pull it. And we'll see why it's important to then go and do the vertical speed. So here we are, once again, I'm going to see that the glide slope is coming down, and I'll let us get a bit high. And this one I'm going to fix, so I'm going to show you that it is possible to fix it, and that's why we do this procedure in the order that we do it, to make sure we are covered. And it is a really good procedure. It's just something you have to have in your head and have to be ready for, because it usually happens last minute. There's some places you can predict it, but there's other places where it could just be circumstance in the last few seconds before glide slope where suddenly you need to be ready to do this procedure. So it's something we do brief quite regularly to make sure we're ready for it. Okay, so here we go. The glide slope's going beneath us and we're not cleared. So I'm going to put out flap 2 as I have done before. Flap 2, gear down. And we see it going below. Okay, and now air traffic clears us to descend to 3,000 feet further with the glide slope. So I'm going to arm the approach, I'm going to wind the altitude up, and then I'm going to accidentally pull it. And you'll see what's happened. Thrust climb, open climb, and the airplane's pitching up. Okay, that's not good, but now the last part, I'm going to pull the vertical speed minus 1,500. Vertical speed minus 1,500. And now we're descending. Yeah, probably a little bit too fast. I'm going to go to flap 3, and I'm going to use slightly more vertical speed, 1,700. And now we're back in the same position, so we are doing our glide slope capture from above. One thing to note, in the A321, we can't use the spoilers or the speed brakes once we are higher than config 2. So config 3 or 4, we cannot use the speed brakes. They auto-retract if you try. And there we go. We're back onto the glide slope profile, and once we've done that, and only once we're on it, glide slope start, now I can reset the going altitude. which I believe is quite low here. I think it's 1500. And there we go. Hopefully that's been of use for you. It's something slightly different, but it's a useful thing to have, especially if you're using VATSIM or some other ATC and you find that you end up a little bit high because you weren't ready for something, or maybe they can't let you descend or they forget, things like that. So it's a useful tool to have. Plenty more videos to come. So thank you very much for watching this one. As I said, not for any real world use, just for us in Explain at Home. And I'll see you again in a video soon. Thank you very much for watching.